Hey guys, it's Austin back again with another video for Human Ideals. In this video, I just wanted to share with you guys a little presentation I made for my biology of the brain class. And I took this class because of my interest in meditation, and I really wanted to figure out what the story of Buddha's enlightenment was in terms of his neurological changes, which is why I chose the subject for my research project. uh, the neuroscience of Buddha's enlightenment. So before I talk about the biological changes that happened to him, I want to first explain what this term spiritual enlightenment really means. So now I would define spiritual enlightenment as the complete transcendence of suffering, dukkha, through the following factors. The first factor is disillusionment, and now this can be seen in the quote, "Sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha." So this basically means all sabbe, volitional formations, sankhara, which includes our thoughts, speech, and actions, and the conditions motivating them, and the things we acquire as a result of them. I got this definition basically from Lal Pinatawage. He's the author of the website puredhamma.net. So basically, this quote is again, all of these volitional formations, which encompass these three phases, our thought, speech, and actions, what motivates them, and the things we acquire as a result of them, mainly worldly attachments, are impermanent, anicca. So hence, all of these volitional formations are unsatisfying, dukkha. Now, the author of this website, Lal, he's under a lot of controversy because he translates this term, anicca, as not remaining to one's satisfaction in the long run. And this tends to be a trend with a lot of revisionist Sinhalese monks as well, Sinhalese teachers of Buddhism, rather than the consensus interpretation of impermanent. And they dissect this word etymologically as an plus icca, rather than the conventional a plus nicca, where nicca does mean permanent and not remaining to one's satisfaction in the long run. And he translates dukkha as ultimately unsatisfying despite the existence of pleasure, instead of only unsatisfying. Now the logic behind that is, the Buddha didn't say that, all of life is suffering. He said that, there are some pleasures to be had. There are some pleasures to be had in life, and then which is why people are attached to it. But ultimately, despite these pleasures, because they don't remain to one's satisfaction in the long run, that they are seen as ultimately unsatisfying. Now, there is a lot of truth to this logic. However, in my research, I found that, the dissection of anicca as an plus icca doesn't seem to be etymologically correct, and this was pointed out by Piatan. And in this little section below, the proper word for not desired for, or something like that, is anicca. Anicca with the icca spelled I-C-C-H-A, not I-C-C-A. I-C-C-A, icca, is not a word. It doesn't seem to be a word as far as my research has shown. Anyways, but going back to the word of dukkha, you don't really have to translate it as ultimately unsatisfying despite the existence of pleasure, because dukkha is a very broad word, ranging from the tiniest of moments of dissatisfaction, like, having to scratch an itch or whatnot, and to the most grave suffering that we experience in life. So again, to translate it into that long definition is kind of redundant. But anyways, moving on, the next factor behind enlightenment is disidentification. Now, this is embodied in the quote, "Nitam mama nesoham asmi na meso adati," which is commonly translated as, "It is not mine, I am not it, it is not myself." And now it refers to the five aggregates, or panchakanda, which is materiality, rupa, feelings, vedana, perceptions, sanya, volitional formations, sankhara, and sensory consciousness, vijnana. But some revisionist translators, which take the word anatta as meaning not my soul, the soul being the impersonal essence behind the five aggregates, they translate this passage as, that's not mine, I'm not that, that's not myself, self with a capital S, not the personal reflexive self, and which the capital S self also referring, which is another word for the soul. As I pointed out here, the self, as Theravada translates Ada, is only the personal reflexive self, the Namarupa self, which another author, Ken Wheeler, points out. And then the soul, as Dr. Ananda K. Coomaraswamy translates Ada, is impersonal. During his time, Dr. Coomaraswamy published a lot of texts that bridged the commonalities between so-called Hinduism, which wasn't really a thing, which in itself, Hinduism isn't a homogeneous, religion, but that's a subject for another day. But basically, this method of disidentification, if you're going with the revisionist interpretation, it relies on something called apophatic theology. Now, apophatic theology is the negation of everything the highest goal of enlightenment isn't, or God, whatever, God, the true self, the soul, whatever you want to call it, by negating everything that it's not. So the soul isn't the five aggregates. So according to apophatic theology, you would describe it based on what it is not. So the soul isn't the five aggregates. It isn't form. It isn't materiality, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, or consciousness, instead of describing what it is. And now, another foundation to enlightenment is perfect recollection, or sammasati. Sammasati is the practice of recollection, or sati, or self-restraint against unwholesome volitional formations, so which is denoted by the modifier apunya, or unwholesome, apunya abhisankhara, to liberate the chitta, or which is a term for the mind, from the five aggregates, panchakanda. And this sammasati is cultivated through two important aspects. The first is what I mentioned earlier, disillusionment, specifically with the three characteristics of existence, or the dilakkhana, again, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And the second is the use of objects like death, unconditional love, moral precepts, or the breath to essentially displace this illusionment from a place of detachment, and you channel it into directing the chitta back onto itself. So you're creating a state of self-similarity onto a state of perfection, which is what the term sama means. Now, usually in the context of the Eightfold Path, the word sama is translated as right by mainstream Pali translators, but this gets into like a moral depiction of right versus wrong, which is highly ambiguous. But in other areas, mainstream translators do agree, like for example, the word Sama Sambuddha, or like which they usually translate as, perfectly self-enlightened Buddha, or the Buddha who became perfectly enlightened all by himself without any help or any external teacher, right? So in other cases, it's translated as perfect or complete, but then in this case, it's only translated as right. So perfect recollection, perfect in the sense of antecedent perfection. The chitta, or the soul, synonymous with the soul, being perfectly self-directed away from the five khandhas, being antecedent or perfectly prior to the five khandhas or aggregates. And now, so the last foundation, through sammasati, which is perfect recollection, this practice cultivates in what is called perfect absorption, or samma samadhi. Or samma samadhi is, I would define it as infused contemplative absorption in the soul. Atan, and atan is synonymous with the chitta, the mind, again, directed onto itself through perfect recollection, sammasati, right? And now, Ken Wheeler, as I mentioned, he is the founder of the YouTube channel, Theoria Apophysis, so shout out to him. He published a work on his previous site, aten.com, through this quote, Chitta di ateno, which he translates as the mind is the soul. If there are any mainstream Pali scholars that disagree with this, please feel free to comment, say what it actually means. Again, this quote is not definitive. I myself am not sure, so I'm just checking with any other Pali translators that are out there. So anyways, in samadhi, or samadhi in general, absorption, there are 4 progressive levels called jhana and contemplative states. And this word jhana is derived from the word japeti, which means to burn up. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the root of suffering, which is in the default mode network. Now, the default mode network consists of 2 nodes. The one is in the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, and the other is in the medial temporal lobe. And they correspond to the sense of the duality between self and other, and being a self in time. Now, through meditation, what will happen is that the way in which these nodes light up in the brain after meditation, this whole default mode network, the stream of self-referencing that goes on throughout the day will start to decrease, and it will go from diagram A to diagram B, from a more central activation system to a more lateral activation system. Okay, so first of all, the Buddha, before we get into how the Buddha got enlightened, we have to give an overview of his journey. And now his journey starts off with, adolescence and thinking about life. And after being disillusioned with it, he left his family and began his journey as a renunciant. Now, as a renunciant, he went through very harsh ascetic practices, which were very extreme. So as you can see in these brain regions, the green region corresponds to positive emotion, and the red region corresponds to negative emotion. And these are the left and right amygdala. So in adolescence, both amygdala are active, but then as he begins meditation, his right amygdala becomes less active. So he's gaining more positive emotion. And at that time, he became extremely emaciated. And so eventually, as you can see, that because of these harsh conditions, his default mode network was still firing like crazy. These 2 nodes activating, whether it's about remembering the past or imagining the future. So this is why, after enduring all that, one day he remembered his time in meditation as a young boy, while he was sitting under a rose apple tree, as described in the Mahasachika Sutta, or the longer discourse to Sachika, and he remembered entering a state of contemplative absorption, also known as jhana, or more specifically, the first jhana. So after remembering that, he realized that his ascetic practices were too extreme. So he immediately changes course, and his right amygdala, which activates negative emotion, bursts into activity. And so he becomes really forceful and strenuous with himself, and he makes the ultimate vow. And so remember, I refer to jhana as a state of infused contemplative absorption. The infused part is because it involves a flow of energy in the body. There are many hypotheses as to what this energy actually is. Some people say it's scalar waves, like Jana Dixon in her book on Kundalini. Some say it's vacuum energy. Some say it's the Higgs field. There's a lot of pseudoscience around this, so I didn't really want to go into this in too much depth. But as for the actual mechanism of meditation, it goes off of the principle of Ohm's law, which is I current equals to V electromotive force over R resistance. And so what you do is you coincide with your entire body, which cultivates a sense of whole bodily presence. And then if you let go of all the tension in your body, this energy starts to flow down through you and obviate all of your suffering. So this energy also corresponds to the opening of ion channels, more specifically the voltage-gated sodium channels here, as we saw in lecture. And they also, because sodium has a positive charge, this obviously depolarizes the cerebrospinal fluid that corresponds with this energy, and I'll explain why it's CSF later on, but there's also calcium channels that open up, which are responsible for regulating the heart, which then regulates your entire emotional state, or more specifically, the heart rhythm. So now this cerebrospinal fluid, which becomes ionized through the energy, is located within the meninges and the ventricles. And now, when you relax the meninges in the lowering of tension, the CSF travels down through the lymphatic vessels. Now, this relaxed step was discovered by Bhante Vimalamsi from the Dhammasukha Meditation Center. And this CSF basically coats the entire central nervous system. And as you can see, the Indian yogis, they've mapped out this 7 chakra system, which is very well known in meditation. And yeah, it corresponds basically to the sympathetic and parasympathetic ganglia along the spine in the central nervous system. So this ionized cerebrospinal fluid eventually flows through the entire body, and this guru named Adidas Samraj first discovered the body-mind circuit of the energy in progressive stages. It flows through the entire body and then opens up through the crown chakra like so. But then it makes another descent. After the ascent, it makes another descent back down into the body, and specifically into the heart, through the superior vena cava, as you can see here, this little blue colored chamber, and then the right atrium, which is just below it. And as you can see, there's this little golden node, which is called the sinoatrial node, which acts as the body's pacemaker. In Pali, this is called the Hariya Watu. And again, it descends through the heart, as you can see. So now, through this energy, we descend. The Buddha ascended through a number of contemplative states. And the first one is the first jhana. So, accompanied by applied and sustained thought, there's rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So in the applied thought, as you can see, the prefrontal cortex starts to become active. This is responsible for executive managerial functions, focusing on certain tasks, and then sustained thought through the anterior cingulate cortex. This also corresponds to the back region I mentioned earlier in the default mode network. Then there's rapture and pleasure. This corresponds to the dopamine system. Now, unlike common conceptions of dopamine as being responsible for pleasure, it's actually more responsible for craving. But this is a light form of craving because there's ecstasy here, and it's not an unwholesome source of pleasure, as the Buddha would say. And then after ecstasy comes a more sublime form of bliss, and that corresponds to norepinephrine or adrenaline, and it gives you a sense of alertness. Now, in the second jhana, the applied and sustained thought fade away. So the self-referential verbalization in the default mode network also fades. There's no conceptualization in language. Some things that are activated are the basal ganglia, thalamus, the parietal cortex. And again, all of this was mentioned in Rick Hanson's book, The Buddha's Brain. And so rapture and pleasure persist, but they're a lot more mild. And now in the third jhana, rapture also fades away, and now you become equanimous. And so applied and sustained thought fade, rapture fades, and in equanimity, the amygdala gets very, very quiet, and the other emotional centers go offline. So the anterior cingulate cortex and the norepinephrine circuit are tied together. And in the fourth jhana, now we abandon both pleasure and pain. So the amygdala, basal ganglia, thalamus, hippocampus, everything mentioned in Todd Murphy's brain diagrams as well, they also turn way down, and there's even less default mode network activity. And the dopamine, which I mentioned is responsible for craving, not pleasure, is also extremely limited here. So there is a sense of non-reactivity and brightness of mind. So again, going back to Todd Murphy's diagram, this was the climax. or near the climax of the Buddha's enlightenment. He experienced many unpleasant states here. Again, here the right amygdala became active, and he experiences unpleasant states like the famous visions of the trial against Mara, the demon, and the many temptations, the daughters of Mara, the temptations like lust and desire and pride, all of that. So this is where the right amygdala and right hippocampus start to tie together. The right amygdaloid activation spreads to the right hippocampus, and the hippocampus is responsible for visual spatial memory. So this is why he saw these visions. But then this is the climax of his enlightenment, where as he's meditating, he goes through these unpleasant states, and then all of a sudden, as you can see here, after 8:44 or so, this is from a study by the Dhammasukha Meditation Center on one of their advanced students. His heart rate completely flatlines, and this attainment is called Sanya Vedita Nirodha in Pali, or the cessation of complete cessation of perception and feeling. As you can see, the heart is flatlined, but then his right amygdaloid and hippocampal activity, they're completely maximized. So basically it shifts over to the left amygdala. So again, he experiences this positive emotion again, but the synapses that inhibit this right to left activation drop out. So whenever he has an overload, he always has a steady stream of neural activity from the right amygdala to the left amygdala. So there is no overload, and which is why basically what Todd Murphy says is that after enlightenment, all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant on the body or in the mind, they're able to be recontextualized positively. And this correlates to a steady flow of cerebrospinal fluid into the sinoatrial node, which in Advaitic terminology or yogic terminology culminates in the heart release and the regeneration of this channel called Amrita Nadi, as you can see on the left. Now he's fully enlightened, and again, there's ways to access the right amygdala, but then they're routed to other parts of the brain, so there's no overload, and so his right hippocampus also has access to the left amygdala. So the synapses inhibiting activity between the right and left, and between the left amygdala and right hippocampus are also, all of those synapses drop out. And so with this steady stream of ionized cerebrospinal fluid and the heart release and the dropping out of the synapses, we finally get a shift in the body's heart rhythm. Heart rhythm from very strenuous, which is a lack of coherence. Here you can see what emotions like anger or even like mild focus do, to a more stable state of relaxation. And this is that open whole bodily presence that I mentioned earlier. Even though it is very forceful, it is still very relaxed because of the dialectic of presence and surrender. And then this ionized cerebrospinal fluid, obviously the steady flow of it through the released sinoatrial node, there is more coherence. And then so this heart rate coherence, and this can be seen in emotions like appreciation, which don't stress the body. So that pretty much concludes my presentation, and here are my references. So as I've mentioned, there are many unanswered questions that I didn't really go over in this presentation. The first thing, of course, is in the earlier part I talked about the energy that is involved with Buddha's enlightenment. And if you look at the field of modern science, obviously scientists don't really agree on what this so-called energy, mysterious energy in the universe, whether they'd call it dark matter or dark energy, is actually made of. The closest theories we have on it have to do with a model based in quantum mechanics. But anyways, if there is anyone watching this that is a scientist, knowledgeable in this area, perhaps you could share your hypothesis on what this energy is, and if you could link me some studies regarding this energy that you would know of, that would be really great. Also, another thing is with regards to the meditation method itself. Mr. Gardner, in his work, has mentioned that the way you coincide with your entire body is in Buddha's Anapanasati Sutta, or the discourse on recollection by breath. There's this step called Sabagaya Parisamvedi, which basically means experiencing all bodies I breathe in, or experiencing all bodies. Sabagaya Parisamvedi, Asasami Pasasami Sikati. That whole verse means experiencing all bodies I breathe in and out. So with regards to all bodies, a lot of people translate the word Sabagaya, Saba meaning whole or all, as meaning the entire, Sabagaya as the entire physical body, like the literal physical body. But according to various commentaries, because in the sutta it doesn't actually specify what this term Sabagaya really means, in commentaries like the Prisambhida Magga, the Prisambhida Magga says that this step refers to the experiencing of two bodies. That the author of the Prisambhida Magga says, Sariputta himself, he said that it refers to experiencing the physical body and the mental body. So the physical body and the mental body refer to the physical and mental aspects of the five aggregates specifically. And so you experience these bodies, and then the quality you're supposed to cultivate, rather than this whole bodily presence, he says that you're supposed to cultivate one-pointedness and non-distraction, and a sort of stability in the chitta, or the mind, through experiencing the feelings that come with these two bodies and understanding subconsciously what to do with them, which is what the understanding of what to do with them comes in the next passage right after that one, called Pasambhaya Kaya Sankhara. So Pasambhaya means to calm or to tranquilize, and then Kaya Sankhara is the Sankhara Kaya. Sankhara Kaya is body, and Sankhara is volitional formations, so calming the bodily formations. And so these bodily formations include a swaying or agitation, tightness, and the in-breaths and out-breaths themselves. So that is the letting go part. But in terms of, like I mentioned, the experiencing the entire body, that's still a point of ambiguity, because since there's no whole bodily presence, as mentioned, even in the commentaries, even in the Prisambhida Magga, which was a part of the Khuddaka Nikaya, or the Khuddaka Nikaya is one of the five main collections of the Buddha's original suttas. And even in that one, which the commentary of the Prisambhida Magga is pretty close in proximity to the Buddha's time, the closest, in fact, you can see that there is no mention of, cultivating a sort of forceful, whole bodily conscious presence. And so anyway, that is a point of controversy. And with regards to that Sabakaya Parisamvedi, a lot of Theravadan Buddhist teachers teach that this step refers to feeling the beginning, middle, and end of the in-breaths and out-breaths, not feeling the entire physical body. Again, this interpretation comes from later commentaries, such as the Visuddhimagga, written by Buddhaghosa. I believe it's 1,000 years after the Buddha's passing. So again, that interpretation is also questionable. But anyways, the mechanism of enlightenment itself, with energy flowing into the heart center and the heart release, seems to be fairly accurate. Another thing is with regards to this idea of breath meditation. I didn't talk about it a lot in this presentation, but there are some people, such as Ken Wheeler himself or Lau Pinatuwagi, who say that the Buddha was not referring to the actual physical breath, but Ken Wheeler says that the breath is a symbolism for the animus, and the animus being a synonym for the chitta, or the mind itself, the soul, the animus, or i.e. the animating spirit. Again, that's very controversial. The method that he explains does involve the physical breath, but it's about standing prior to the breath, or being antecedent to the physical breath and not following it. Again, that's a point of controversy. Lal Pinatuwage says that the breath is not about the physical breath, but about taking in wholesome thoughts and discarding unwholesome thoughts. So that's a very mental exercise, and it doesn't involve any energetic transformation or energy flowing into the heart center. He does talk about the heart center, but it seems to be a very secondary effect. So yeah, there are many points of controversy in modern Buddhism that needs to be studied further. And although this presentation is by no means comprehensive, I hope that it does point a direction for further research with regards to the entire Buddhist community, and of course for myself. And just before I end this, I do want to talk about an upcoming video that I'm going to be releasing. So as you guys may know already, I've mentioned that I've been trying to set up Human Ideals as a spiritual activism group on campus at USC. And a few days ago, I was able to conduct a presentation for one of my friends in the Interfaith Council. And basically, I presented on the vision of human ideals and what direction I wanted to go in as a spiritual activism group on campus, and how we're going to be integrating spiritual practices with the various political issues of today. And of course, this energetic meditation is but a part of it. So yeah, if we do get around to doing that group, having that group on a weekly basis, I do plan to upload our weekly sessions with the students to our Facebook and YouTube page. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.